some I don't even know what they're called, progressive. Some people online and elsewhere are like, see, Trump's going to make Gaza worse. This week, Trump was heard saying that he wants to clean out all of Gaza, that he wants Egypt to take a bunch of people, like 1.5 million people. And he literally used the words clean out, effectively ethnic cleansing. And this has been used to sort of rub in the faces of those who couldn't bring themselves to vote for someone who was not breaking with the policies of Joe Biden.
This line is born from profound ignorance and cynicism for one simple reason, which is we have no idea what Trump's policy with respect to Gaza is going to be in either direction. He's only been in office for 8 days. Trump, by all accounts, did implement or enforce through threat and treat, the substance of which, the details of which we don't know, a ceasefire. That has been Arab officials, Qatari officials, Egyptian officials have all confirmed this, that the reason why there is presently a ceasefire and has been for about 9 days in Gaza is because of Trump.
Right.
Now, that does not, and then the second that happened, you had people on the other side kind of spiking the football and saying, look, Trump was better on Gaza. And I think the reality is that we have no idea. And the policy of ethnic cleansing that Trump seemingly is promoting, which I think he is, at least rhetorically, obviously without an end to the ceasefire, that's not really possible, is a bipartisan policy. It was the policy of the Biden administration, which armed and funded ethnic cleansing. And I think when people are trying to dunk on that, it's born from a profound ignorance, but also ignorance, an assumed ignorance of the people watching or listening, who think that this was not already U.S. policy, which it was. It's called the General's Plan. It's been going on for several months in northern Gaza. Haaretz magazine had an editorial saying it's ethnic cleansing. Human Rights Watch says it's ethnic cleansing. Ethnic cleansing has already happened in Gaza under Biden's watch explicitly over the last 6 months while the U.S. continued to arm and fund it. And to say, well, you got yours. You had under Biden, we have ethnic cleansing where you're forced into tent cities on the border of Egypt in a camp the size of LAX airport, versus under Trump's nominal or sort of rhetorical plan, you get ethnic cleansing where you're forced into the Sinai. These aren't morally that meaningfully different. Internally displacing people with ethnic cleansing is obviously, from the perspective of those being ethnically cleansed, is not meaningfully different than ethnically cleansing them to other countries.
Sure.
Now, this is a plan that has been on so reportedly, Blinken and Biden did push Egypt to quote unquote accept refugees early on. So this is a plan that's also been endorsed by Biden, depending on what reporting you believe in.
They wanted like a third party, some Arab nation or conglomerate of such trained by the U.S. to basically run Gaza instead.
Well, no, I meant to actually export Palestinians from Gaza.
Yeah.
Now that did not gain much traction. Nominally, they opposed it, but supposedly some reporting said they supported it. They certainly wouldn't have opposed it, but historically, Egypt and Jordan and others have said, no way, I'm not going to be a party to this. It would pretty much erode any moral credibility they have. Also, Egypt doesn't want Muslim Brotherhood connected groups in their country for a variety of reasons.
Right.
But people banking on this, look at this ethnic cleansing statement Trump made to kind of get some smug dunk on, I guess they call them now like Dearborn voters is their kind of go-to for these.
Oh boy.
For these kind of, it is profoundly ignorant, but also profoundly premature. Now, that could be the case. That could end up being the case that Trump does whatever their rhetoric says, Gaza plus or Gaza worse. Gaza plus, genocide or genocide plus rather, genocide 10% worse. We don't know. We don't know what's going to happen. Frankly, the when you're discussing variations of different types of genocide, the lesser of two evils argument begins to kind of break down into a morality singularity where the math doesn't really make sense. Well, and ultimately, I always viewed it during the election as kind of a non sequitur. Now, if somebody wanted to make the argument that Harris is better for X, Y, and Z reason, for Medicaid, for all the things we're seeing now, for WIC, for the liberal state, for the regulatory state, for the NLRB, for the FTC, you want to make that argument. I've always thought that was a perfectly reasonable argument to make, totally 100% accurate. But to try to make the argument that Harris or Biden, the Biden-Harris regime would have been better for Gaza is to the point where you're saying, well, the genocide is going to be slightly less genocidal, strikes me as morally unserious position to take, and not one that I think most people really, and again, to the extent to which it's borne out, rhetoric, notwithstanding, it's been the opposite. So
let me just jump in, because I think we're maintaining this for the entire election cycle. And I watched some of the things, listened to the things you were saying, and it was hard because in terms of cynicism, I feel like you've been very cynical, but perhaps right on a lot of this. And I do think that because you were basically saying, look, there's no real policy difference. In fact, she admitted, Kamala Harris, that there wasn't going to be a policy difference between her and Biden on the genocide on Gaza. The only difference between the policy difference, it seems, between Biden and Trump thus far has been the allowance of 2,000-pound bombs, which you could argue can do just as much damage.
That was totally superficial, though, because when they withheld the 2,000-pound bombs last summer, or last spring rather, they explicitly said, and you can go look it up in the New York Times, that Israel had more than enough for years. It was the definition of a superficial token gesture. So again, when liberals smugly point that out, it's like that displays just profound ignorance, either on the part of the speaker or the part of those who are listening who think that that's meaningful. And I'm telling you, you cannot find a single Palestinian, or at least not more than you can fit into a single room, who would argue that that is a meaningful difference. It's not.
Well, and let me just break it down too, because I do think that one of the things in terms of the liberal washing of this is just that. It's that this is the same policy, but washed in a tragic, we think this is awful. It's, we believe in the human rights of Palestinians and the self-determination. I believe Kamala Harris even managed to say everyone thought that was, something different, and it wasn't actually. And look, I'm also here to say
that was almost verbatim. That was almost verbatim rhetoric used by Rex Tillerson, Trump's Secretary of State in 2017. He used the exact same language because it's pro forma State Department language.
Now, where I've disagreed with you, Adam, is that I do think we know. I think we know Trump's going to be worse. So I'll just say that, even though I know you disagree. I also think that Kamala Harris.
How? What does that mean?
I do think that in terms of
Gaza or just in general? I mean, in general, obviously.
On Palestine.
How?
On the annexation of the West Bank.
It's already been annexed. It's been annexed since 1967. It's de jure versus de facto.
I'm saying that I disagree. I think that for me on Palestine, there is far more, and you saw this in real time, when there was far more pressure and pushback when Biden and Kamala Harris were running. And now that, Trump is in office, it is incredibly demobilizing. And I think our window to actually change shit is diminished on this issue particularly. I just think that with most all issues in this duopoly that we live in, but particularly on Palestine. So I'm saying I disagree with you, but I hear you. But I also think that Kamala Harris wasn't
but the pressure
committed, committed Zionist in the way that Biden is a committed Zionist. Biden is a committed Zionist. He's ideologically there. Trump is not an ideological Zionist, but he is an ideological sociopath.
He's an ideological racist.
Well, right, exactly. He's an ideological racist, and it allowed ethnic cleansing is all hunky dory, whereas Biden bought the Zionist line, hook, line, and sinker. We have to do ethnic cleansing to save us from this other ethnic cleansing that's not happening. So. That I'll say, but I just want to go to the YouGov polls, and I know you've seen this and talked about it. But
I would
say
important. One thing to that. Can I say one thing to that? Sorry, real quick. If Harris was going to do something different than Biden, which she very explicitly said she was not, it has now been over 3 months since the election. Why has she not said what that would have been? If we're going to talk about counterfactuals, why is no one from her circle? She never said
she was going to do anything different. She never said.
Well, I'm saying that if the assumption was that she somehow secretly was going to be better on Gaza, but could not reveal it because she was vice president, or the Israel lobby, these other kind of excuses. It's now been 3 months. She has nothing to lose. I don't know why no one from her camp has leaked anything to that effect.
Right.
No, it's pure.
I think she's a coward. I think it's because she's a coward.
So why would I believe that it would be any different? I mean, again, I do
think that she's different from both Biden. She's not an ideological Zionist, and she's not a racist.
How do I know?
I mean, in the ways that
she was at every APAC conference her entire political career. I mean, I don't know.
No, because APAC that's like a fucking pageant that you have to show up at. We all know that.
A lot of people don't do the APAC conference. A lot of candidates don't do the APAC
I understand, but you know what I'm saying?
In other words, I don't know what it would look like.
My basic argument, I'm trying to give you credit, Adam, for being correct.
Sorry, I'm being hostile. Go ahead.
But I am trying to say,
topic.
No, I understand. And that's why I'm like, I want to have you on, because I know you've been passionate about it. But I also feel as though the window for us to pressure, I think you don't disagree with me on that, under a Harris administration, and this is all fucking water under the bridge at this point. The reason I wanted to for the libs, the reason I wanted to bring this up is because it really, the election really did hinge on it. And it was something that we've all pointed out. But again, the YouGov poll with the Institute for Middle East Understanding Policy Project, by more than a 3-to-1 margin, Biden 2020 voters who did not vote for Harris said they would have been more likely to vote for Harris if she, quote, pledged to break from Biden's foreign policy towards Gaza by promising to withhold additional weapons to Israel rather than less likely. 36% more likely, 10% less likely, made no difference, 54%. Okay. But a poll released, let's see, 29% of voters nationally who voted for Biden in 2020 cast a ballot for someone besides Kamala Harris in 2024, said ending the violence in Gaza was a top issue, with economy a close second. So basically the people who voted for somebody else. And then even the people who did vote for Harris in swing states, specifically by a 7-to-1 margin, said they would have been more enthusiastic in their support to Harris if she had pledged to break from Biden's policy to withhold weapons to Israel. 35% said they would have been more enthusiastic. Now, again, 59% were like, that doesn't make a difference. But those 35% could be people who are like your surrogates, your door knockers, the people who are like, you know, going to bat for you. So all to say, Gaza was an issue. And I totally agree. Like, whether or not she would have made good on it, even Trump was using Gaza as a wedge from him against Biden. Yeah. He said, and I quote again, because it haunts me in the middle of the night, Biden's terrible on Israel. He hates Israel, pause, but I guess he hates Palestinians more. And it was so disgustingly perfect because even he could see the bloodshed. So I guess, like, yes, we don't have to say, like, you know, whatever. Like, I think, you know, I appreciate your passion, and I think you're correct in a lot of ways. And
I mean, ultimately, it was a game of chicken, and unfortunately, that was just the position the White House put activists and Gaza, you know, voters in. As I'm sure we all agree on that, in terms of like who actually it's incumbent upon, who has the power. You know, and the awkward fact is that Trump did compel a ceasefire in Gaza for now, and I stress for now because it's very, very precarious. It's very tenuous. Israel's actually just bombed Rafah, or killed people in Rafah, but it's still limited or whatever. And people are going back to their homes. So from the perspective of people in Gaza, it appears to be a meaningful cessation of hostilities. And he did that with a combination from all reporting of implicit threats, which Biden refused to do, but also treats. He threw the right wing in Israel some treats in terms of, you know, ending sanctions on settlers, which again is like a dozen people. It's not very meaningful. And obviously, I think anyone in Gaza would have taken that bargain had Biden done it in a heartbeat. So, because again, we're talking dozens and hundreds of people dying every day for over 470 days. So, using that, you know, all we can analyze is what we can observe. We can't read people's minds. No. And so, as far as it goes, for now, Trump is better than Biden on Gaza. That could change any second. Because Trump is obviously capricious. He obviously got $215 million from Sheldon Adelson's widow, very staunchly right-wing pro-Israel donor. He obviously took a lot of money from rich far-right Zionist donors. And the only thing I would even consider being the X factor here, which is maybe what some of these kind of protest voters were thinking is that Trump is also heavily motivated by spiting Democrats and spiting his predecessor. He did this with Obama. He would literally do the opposite of what Obama would did just to fucking spite him because he's incredibly petty and all about like 1980s Wall Street, like alpha dog self-help book stuff, like owning your opponent. So to the extent to which what motivated him to actually compel a ceasefire, I think the motivation is pretty clear because he wanted to be the guy that did the thing that Biden couldn't do. And I don't really give a shit what his reasons are, as long as it happens. And so it's happening now. Again, could change overnight. Obviously, Trump changes his mind. You know, he went from making nuclear, you know, threatening to nuke North Korea to being buddy with Kim Jong-un. So like he changes all the time. So we don't know what to expect over the next few months.
I mean, I do think this is a little like I disagree. I definitely think like, you know, obviously Marcos Granger's pointing out, Huckabee being the ambassador to Israel who like doesn't even think Palestinians exist. Elise Stefanik, like all this, the kinds of people that he's putting in there. It's gonna be worse, but I hear you on saying that like
maybe it will, maybe it won't. I mean,
here's my question though.
How do you get worse than what Biden did to Gaza? It's really hard. And I'm not saying it's not possible, but it would take a lot to be worse than what Biden did to Gaza.
Sure. I mean, it's one thing to say Palestinians don't exist, but Biden still acted as if they didn't anyway. So
right. What difference does it make? He also spent weeks denying the death count, doing genocide denial. He spent weeks talking about 40 beheaded babies. He spent weeks doing all this kind of racist incitement to genocide stuff. So like, I'm not saying Trump can be worse than Biden on Gaza, or some counterfactual with Harris, which again, we sort of unknowable. I'm saying that it hasn't happened yet, but it could. Sure. And anyone spiking the football in either direction is being extremely premature. Because we simply don't know. And rather than trying to score points and settle, Twitter scores and doing this, my friend and I make fun of it. It's the warned y'all post on Twitter. It's like, I told you, blah. It's like, how is this useful? How is this valuable? How does this help anything?
But I think that even the people who they're trying to dunk on actually knew that Trump would be the same, if not worse. The difference is rallying behind a candidate who is funding genocide and the maiming and murdering of children and is like intolerable. And so which side of history would you rather fucking be on? I mean, I think it's pretty clear. And again, I agree with you on making the case against Trump for a million other reasons. This one was obviously we know it wasn't a strong one. And I think beyond this, I think Gaza, in the way that the Iraq War undid the media and in large part the Democratic Party, although, they never, they didn't necessarily weren't made to suffer for it. I think Gaza's undone the media and the Democratic Party. I think once again, foreign policy and democratic militarism, it has undermined their entire bullshit posturing about human rights and all that.
I mean, the sort of liberal rules-based order claptrap was always pretty thin, and now it's doesn't exist. I mean, no one takes this stuff seriously. I think that I never made the argument Trump would be better on Gaza, current ceasefire notwithstanding, because the idea of better on Gaza when he has a history from 2017 to 2021. Of killing tens of thousands of Yemeni, giving Saudi Arabia, open season on Yemen, on his full-blown destruction of Mosul, his destruction of, you name it. I mean, the guy obviously has no issues with killing tens of thousands of Arabs. And had he been president on October 7th, the differences would have been non-existent. I mean, he wouldn't have done all the bleeding heart claptrap. I think there would have been probably a more effective democratic opposition rather than bipartisan consensus. But no doubt in my mind, he would have done the same thing, more or less.
And my question is about, though, like what it's meant for the Democratic Party. Where do you think, I feel like has lost them. I mean, there's a crisis in legitimacy and leadership right now, but it's like, I do think this has been their undoing. I
would say it's exposed. It exposes the contradictions in so-called liberal rules-based order in a way that is beyond negotiable. And this is why, again, there's been elements of the so-called deep state that have never really been too hot on this. The Pentagon has kind of been whatever. The CIA, vis-a-vis its leaks at its surrogate at the Washington Post, David Ignatius, has been basically try to take the opportunity in November of 2023 during the first 2-week pause, the only other pause, to say, all right, it's time to wrap it up. Israel, you sort of made your point. You killed at that point, 3,000 Palestinian children, 4,000 Palestinian children. It's time to move on. So I do think that people understand that the long-term credibility of the U.S. imperial project, such as it is, has been went from maybe 8% credibility to 0.001% credibility. And that all the sort of goodwill that was built up over, Ukraine or these other kind of obviously far more legitimate military interventions than backing a genocide of a caged people has completely eroded this. And so then that raises the opportunity of, well, what replaces it? What emerges in its order? And this is something that I know activists and academics and others within this sort of left-wing foreign policy space are working on, because the alternative of just pure campism, where it's like, well, I guess, China's the good guy now. Not that I think they're the bad guy necessarily in the sense, but I think that pure campism doesn't really get you very far either, because then that has its own contradictions and its own problems. That something needs to emerge that begins to look like genuine international solidarity that is not based on this kind of meddling empire who crowns itself the arbiter of human rights and the arbiter of democracy. These just completely insufferable hypocrites like Samantha Power,
just
talking
an actual anti-war Democrat, like an actual anti-war candidate who isn't obviously like, I mean, remember how that was Tulsi? We're going to end forever wars, except unless they're Muslim.
Well, yeah, she was always an anti-Muslim racist. So that was.
Yeah. But like an actual anti-war candidate who can problematize all this and talk about, everything from, military bases to military funding to lack of care of the veterans and all that. And it's like, when will Democrats fucking get like break with this is my big thing. And I think the media, again, with the lack of credibility, like they're in a crisis. CNN and MSNBC, they're in this crisis. And it's like, well, it didn't fucking help that you barely allowed for Palestinian voices to speak during this ongoing genocide.
Yes, as I am documenting for the nation, the bias is pretty clear cut. It's pretty empirically obvious, and I think that credibility. And this is what really gave oomph to the TikTok ban in April of 2024, which not coincidentally was the peak of the campus protests. It had always been there. It was kind of like a steady state national security China thing, but really what gave it bipartisanship and really turned around people like Chris Murphy and others was this idea that TikTok, because it wasn't giving the kind of Jake Tapper, human shields, racist line on everything, what needed to sort of be snuffed out. Or what they really wanted to do was intimidate TikTok to sort of toe the line and to sort of deplatform. And they did to some extent deplatform Palestinian content. And obviously the juxtaposition between what people saw on social media versus what they were seeing in corporate media, to the extent that people under the age of 35 even watch it or read it, was profound. And it contributed to this crisis of credibility.
What's going on, Frantifa? If you haven't already, subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that button. And also, you can become a patron and support the show every single week. Get access to bonus episodes and exclusive merchandise. Patreon.com/Bitchuation Room. Do it.